I first heard of Secret of Mana quite some time ago. It's a game that all I knew about it was that it was a huge classic and everyone loved it. Then I played it, and whoo boy. Long story short, I don't like this game. I tend to give a lot of games the benefit of the doubt, but this one just didn't do it for me. I don't think I've had a game actively frustrate me as much as this one did. So that brings me to what I want to discuss today. I'm going to go through the list of every issue I have with this game and explain why I think it's a problem. Personally, I think this game falls short in 3 ways: story, direction, and combat. First off, let's start with the story of the game. Guys, there's pretty much no story. It's basically the same "you're the chosen one who's destined to save the world" shtick that is way too common in RPGs. Basically, there's an evil empire that's out there to use the power of the sealed mana fortress to rule the world or something. It's honestly not all that interesting to play though. There's virtually no memorable moments in the plot, and that's made worse by the fact that it practically does nothing to make you care. The characters are just really bland. The 3 protagonists have virtually no personality whatsoever, and the supporting cast is barely given any time to flesh out who they are. Why should I care about any of these characters? None of them are on screen long enough to establish any reason to. The only character with any real backstory is Randy, but by that point I was just so done with this game, I was pretty much just there to see the end. What makes this even stranger is that this is a Squaresoft game, as in the same Squaresoft that made Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. These guys know how to write good video game stories. Although, for the sake of fairness, story isn't everything in a game. Not every game needs one to be good. Mario has been reusing the same plot for years, but no one cares because the gameplay is so good. And I would honestly probably be fine with Secret of Mana having no plot if the gameplay wasn't also really atrocious. First off, I'm going to start with the overall sense of direction in this game. Simply put, this game tells you nothing. This game is needlessly cryptic in its execution. The individual areas are kinda samey, and where you're supposed to go next isn't ever indicated clearly. This sameness is compounded by the lack of a minimap of any kind, which makes it practically impossible to know where exactly you are and if you've gone in a circle or not. How am I supposed to know if I'm going the right way if half the rooms look the same? Towards the end of the game, when you gain access to Flamey, your dragon companion who acts as your airship, you gain access to a world map that takes forever to render. It's also practically impossible to make out anything in the overworld due to the Mode 7 employed by the game, which makes locations hard to distinguish from each other. Seriously, I had to use a map on my phone the entire time to know where any of the locations were because there's no indication to what is what in the game. By far, the worst offender of this game not telling you anything has to do with the UI. Everything is delivered to you in these ring menus, which you can pull up at any time. You can change your equipment, heal, cast magic, among other things, all from here. One of the most asked questions about this game is, how do I go about using healing items in this game? The answer, of course, is to press up to switch from your weapons to your items. But the nature of this unorthodox control design means that if you didn't read the manual, which most people playing this game through an emulator or on the Switch haven't, you would have no idea what to do. Speaking of the manual, this is also the only place you can find out what items and spells do. Yep, there are no item descriptions in this game whatsoever. So again, for modern gamers, especially those who are enjoying it illegally, there is no way to know what anything does without trying it out. Moving to the last and arguably biggest gripe I have about this game, god damn, this game's combat is annoying. At its core, this game tries to take the action-oriented adventure gameplay from the Zelda series and fuse it with the turn-based combat of the Final Fantasy series, which ends up creating an amalgamation of both that excels at neither. The main gimmick of the combat is the recharge mechanic, which requires you to wait for your attacks to charge up before using them. This ends up slowing down combat and keeps you from repeatedly attacking, which will do practically no damage if you don't wait for the meter to fill up. From there, you can charge your attacks further in order to increase the damage, but there's a lot of risk involved, as you can't open up the menu to heal without canceling your charge. On their own, that doesn't seem that bad, but the implementation of this is a huge problem. First off, attacks can miss. Yeah, that's right, you have an accuracy stat in an action RPG. Imagine if in Final Fantasy VII Remake, your attacks that otherwise would have connected just randomly missed. In my experience, these are rare, but it still makes no sense. If I'm playing an action RPG, I expect my attacks that actually hit the enemy to do damage. Of course, you're less likely to miss the enemies, and more likely to be subject to the game's extremely shoddy hit detection system, in which it's a complete gamble as to whether or not your attacks hit at all. This is the real reason why charge attacks are kinda bad, because you always run the risk of the attack just not registering as a hit to begin with. There's no real rhyme or reason to it in my experience, which is the kind of thing that makes for really bad game design. Using random chance in the game can lead to a good gameplay experience if the player understands the uncertainty at play and can strategize around it. What makes it bad is when it seems arbitrary and there's no real strategy to it, just sheer luck of the draw. There's no switching to a safer attack or anything, there's just attacking and hoping and praying that attack connects. Beyond the awful hit detection system, the magic system in this game is completely busted. You gain access to magic through these 8 mana spirits, which provide each of your mages with access to 3 spells. The catch is that each one of them starts out at level 0 and needs to be leveled up in order to become viable. How do you level up magic? By using it repeatedly, except that MP is extremely limited, and if you go through a dungeon constantly using spells in order to level them up, then you run the risk of running out before you reach the end. This is made worse by the fact that you are unable to carry more than 4 of any item at a given time, further choking you for resources, basically making you be sparing with your magic use, except you need to use magic in order to level it up. The only solution to this conundrum is tediously grinding out spells so that they actually deal enough damage to defeat the game's damage sponges known as bosses before you run out. In the event that you do run out, the bosses then become extremely difficult and in some cases borderline impossible to defeat. But with magic, you can basically stunlock them and they become complete jokes that require no thought beyond selecting the spell that they're weak to. Adding to the general clunkiness of the combat experience, your AI companions make matters far worse. They're total idiots who don't ever do anything useful. It's almost as if the game was designed with the thought that everyone has access to a second and third player to make these characters useful. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this game's entire selling point is that it was a multiplayer RPG. But if you're like me and don't have friends to play with because you're actively in quarantine like everyone else, then you're stuck with these idiots. Beyond that, they get stuck constantly and can actually make it impossible to progress as their pathfinding is so bad that they cannot get themselves unstuck. Same guys who went on to make Chrono Trigger, which does not have this issue with your following companions. For me, it wasn't the bad story or lack of direction. I can live with a game having no plot, and we have the internet. I can look up a walkthrough if I really have to. What really got on my nerves though was a combat system so fundamentally unbalanced and broken that it makes this game kind of a chore to play. Secret of Mana has the potential to be a wonderful experience, and for those of you who grew up in the 90s, I understand that this game is very special to you, but I have to reconcile that with my experience. This game has not aged well, at least mechanically. I will maintain that, like the vast majority of the SNES library, the pixel art still looks great, better than most N64 and PlayStation games do. The music, which I find to be a bit more of a mixed bag than most, is pretty solid. God, that song's annoying. But beyond that, the overall structure and gameplay of this game just gives a lot to be desired. Something that a full remake could have easily fixed had it not insisted on trying to emulate how the original game played down to the letter. If you're wondering if you should pick up this game and play it before you dive into Trials of Mana, don't bother. I find it really hard to recommend this game to anyone, especially in today's age. And with that, we are now at the end of this video. Be sure to leave a comment telling me what you think about Secret of Mana. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon to get notified every time I upload a new video. But until that time, guys, peace!